Hello to 531 class, Dr. Hastings here again. This is the other little video narrative relative to week 13 content. In this case, not legal aspects per se, but faculty role and responsibilities in academia relative to scholarship and service. So again, the Smith book tends to use a lot of legalese and precedents related to that. I'm less concerned about that for our purposes, but to give you a practical overview of what this looks like. So scholarship in academia, meaning for many, doing something that's bold and presentable and changes the landscape of our nursing knowledge. So look, this is also biased towards academia. I'd say some hospital systems, again, have pretty high caliber research partners that sometimes partner with education departments. So that certainly does happen on occasion. Let me know what your thoughts are relative to that, and certainly in the DQ. But the goal, okay, of course, in academic setting, oftentimes is for people to be in survival mode as per an expectation of being scholarly. All right, we'll define what scholarship is in a moment. It's not just research. Those that are on tenure track positions in particular, but even those that are on year-to-year contracts, the expectation might be a little lower in this regard for the depth and breadth of scholarship. But it's meaningful. And what does it typically mean? Again, it could be research, certainly, but presentations at professional conferences that oftentimes are just on a complex topic or theme that a given educator has researched extensively and has some perspective on. And that doesn't mean it's just an editorial. That means that in a scholarly way, you would make a case for the importance of any given topic. Okay, so for me, my thing being in psych mental health stigma is a big theme or big topic for me relative to my presenting on it. So I do research related to that, but I also do just write some pieces, you could say, that they would be integrative reviews of the field, and also to create some kind of sense of why that theme is important and why it matters for in support of the idea that mental health awareness and challenging stigma is an important aspect of our roles as educators, and for me in particular, because of my mental health posture. But I always try to make it meaningful on a more global scale relative to the healthcare landscape, to our society as a whole. So presenting on that is something I can do on a fairly regular basis so far. I have an agenda that sort of supported that. But presenting at conferences, workshops, matters. Obviously, research and published research in particular, the whole publishing theme, even higher level, matters. To have a journal article published is even beyond the presentation theme, typically at a conference. Although there are really high caliber conferences that are national and international and may carry a higher weight even. And then, of course, reviewing books or chapters, writing books or chapters, or reviewing journals. I'm a reviewer for a journal, and also acquiring grants. That's the big ticket stuff. That can all equal scholarship in effect then too. So just be aware of these definitions as we roll these out. So again, the question is, what is it? So think of it from the standpoint of Boyer model. Boyer talked about the whole notion of discovery and dissemination. I have it covered right now, but page 260 in the Smith book, table 7.1, very nice review. Discovery, teaching, practice or application, integration. And practice in particular, people never thought of this as scholarship before, but we're clinicians and we are clinical educators. We're clinicians first. So the idea about people, and in particular nurse practitioners, and their practice as being a part of scholarship, their performance there, it's confusing in academic settings. I'll tell you that right now. There's a lot of academic facilities that don't agree with this, but I think it's an important consideration moving forward that that is a thing. There is the scholarship of practice that we can support, and of course, nurse practitioners need to stay in practice to maintain themselves, to be competent educators and preceptors and mentors. They need to. I provide a couple links, AAC and NLN. Some that we've seen before, but the white paper type of content relative to this theme. So what scholarship means in the context of professional nursing. So that's important. So take a look at that. It's not just research, like I said, and even the scholarship of teaching, aside from practice, there's a big push for this and being able to measure what classroom outcomes are in meaningful ways with new innovation in classroom teaching, new pedagogies or andragogies for the adults. So that's important. So think about it. From a discovery standpoint, what do we tend to do in terms of scholarship in nursing? We tend to think of it as just research, but there are other ways of addressing what scholarship is, as we already talked about. What are the kind of research is applied, though, to discovery? Discovery is finding out new knowledge. So typically that is research. Empirical research is quantitative. On the deeper meaning or context or theory development level, it's qualitative. And oftentimes we're looking at descriptive research, digging into the charts, looking at longitudinal perspective studies. So that all matters. The teaching side of it, I mentioned before, SOTL, Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. Think about, again, developing novel pedagogies and andragogies that would be relevant. And what's a great example? Simulation. The practice model, per our nursing grounding, certainly Boyer suggests there is a scholarship of practice, and despite the contention out there in some academic circle, it's relevant. It's only going to pick up speed. Look at other things that sort of count in this realm. Evidence-based practice project directly linked to practice. They tend to count. So the integration piece of scholarship for nursing, think there about the bigger reviews, integrated reviews, but even bigger systematic reviews to best synthesize information in support of practice, i.e. we're looking for best practice. So that's meaningful. Other considerations. Practical kind of things that I want to support that Smith sort of didn't really refer to. You have to think about, and Smith did at least allude to this, the quality of the journals that you're submitting to. So you want your submission and your published manuscript to come from a credible journal. So consider the way in which when you had a nursing research class and critiques were done, we evaluated certain sources, and if they were peer review, they were better. Okay, if they had a blind review, they're even better than that. Avoid typically open access type of journals. Some of these are predatory, and scammy. Look at other variables in addition to peer review to validate credibility, and also the journal's power for disseminating what you care about. So the impact factor, that's meaningful. Other considerations also that Smith referred to, and I'll just go over quickly. Freedom to conduct research and freedom to publish is protected. However, consider then questions of the validity of the data and the conclusions drawn from a study. So these could be contested. These could become even legal actions. Not common, again. It's not something I've seen. Are there people that I think even typically, if there wasn't a full research platform, but people who have written their dissertation with fraudulent data, that has come up every now and then. That's certainly problematic. So I'm sure anybody doing their DNP project, that would never be an issue for our group. Think about the implications, again, also for the potential for harm. If this was clinical research, and some of you work at very high power healthcare agencies that do engage in clinical research, which is critically important. If somebody suffered some level of harm secondary to the research project, that is possible. Okay, point is one needs to be able to defend what they do, the data, their study, in effect then too. That's really critical and really important. So we hope then that most of what would be unclear in a proposed study would be cleared up with an IRB application process with review and then the subsequent approval disposition. But you need to think about that your data is meaningful towards some kind of conclusion. It could involve, again, responses from individuals and people. You need to be able to defend what you did in a meaningful way, especially if it's clinical research with human subjects. So that's a consideration. Other scholarly considerations. When in the teaching role, make sure to get permission in that role for anything that's copyrighted that you put up. So look at Smith page 272, 273, so some thoughts there. And also, though you own your teaching materials, your notes, your activities, your hand, the way in which you plan things out, the way in which you organize your course, remember, okay, that always have students or nurses you're teaching, if it's in a healthcare setting, ask permission for your resource if they want to download and keep them, okay? Because that matters. That's your intellectual property, okay? In an online era, some of the rules have changed. What was typically intellectual property of instructors, now that's been blurred a bit with online course instruction and delivery relative to the contention with some precedents that an academic institution who's supporting the learning platform like Canvas owns all the materials in there. So here I upload notes, you know, and discussion questions, things like that to our Canvas site. Cedar Crest could assert, we own that, you know, that's not something that just is you. So if you go, we still could use that. That could be a legal contention. So that's interesting. And the lines are drawn some. And it's interesting the dichotomy between typical brick and mortar classroom teaching versus online teaching in this regard. So in all things, you know, just sort of be mindful of clearly delineating, you know, and being careful about what you do use in teaching, especially online teaching, if you have any concerns about intellectual property and if you needed to copyright that material yourself for your purposes. All right, and then in ethical practice, again, relative to collegial interactions, say with a research team in particular, just think of how you're managing a research collaborative or other team, especially if the students are involved in the research process. I think that's important then too. Now, let's move to service. Service. This is really what gets me going here at Cedar Crest. So I think there's great opportunities for doing this. But service to the department, service to the community, and service to the profession are key considerations that Smith referred to. So look at all your, oh, I see that my, I'm sorry, I'm off the page here just a little bit. Make sure that your service practices are reasonable and typical. And think about the practice side of this. If you're a nurse practitioner, you have to maintain practice. The limits of service may rear up there then too. But think about the typical expectations. If you're a practitioner, that may be where most of your service duties lie, in effect, then too. I think another consideration relative to this also is, oh, I'm sorry, I bounced this, I didn't mean to. Balance against what is reasonable and feasible for you to do with your time as balanced against your teaching duties as well as your scholarship responsibilities then too. So service comes at a lower tier. Smith didn't really refer to that, but I think that's important. If you're a practitioner and you have to practice, that can't. But service as in being involved in providing workshops to the community, providing some kind of programming and awareness events on campus or health promotion events. Those things may be lower tier. They're nice to do, not always necessary. So just be aware of that. Be careful. The whole idea on that practice side, there are some confusing themes here. Let me just say, and look at page 303 and 306 with Smith. Some institutions, like I said, are not on board with nurse practitioners being engaged in practice, and they don't think it's fair relative to the time, that it could be in conflict with their academic responsibilities, and hence they're not comfortable with the compensation piece, and sometimes ask for a cut. So we've seen that happen before. That's happened in other places where I've worked. So just keep that in consideration. But for many of us in nursing, it comes down to serving, and that's where sort of I live. You know, being involved in, again, some type of campus awareness programs, being involved in committees, certainly. Committees drive an academic institution. I think they do a healthcare institution as well, so you can relate to that, many of you. Special events, you know, time available, but topics like the things I do, and certainly student health and wellness are big themes. And being involved with your professional organization, Sigma Theta Tau being one, that's namely so. So anyway, I just want you to think that service matters to the campus, to the community, and to your profession as well. consider that in these themes. All right, thank you for your attention, and I wish you a great night.